Hello and welcome to this course on animating shapes. Hopefully you've looked at our other course, the Introduction to Graphical Programming, and you've learned how to draw some basic shapes, learn about the coordinate system, learn about comments and errors, and you've actually drawn your own fancy picture. Now, if you've done all that, you'll notice that all the pictures were static. They weren't moving around the screen. So what this course is about is learning how to take some shapes and move them across the screen or animate them. Really exciting part of the journey of learning to program. So let's get started. Let's go into this course on animating shapes, and you'll see the first lesson, Introduction to Variables. And when you do go into this, you'll get some starter code. And I always recommend you just run that and try and figure out what it's doing. So hopefully you recognize some of these commands. Set canvas size 640 by 360. That gives us a canvas that's 640 pixels wide and 360 pixels high. The background command, that sets the color of our canvas. Here we've chosen 128 for red, 0 for green, 128 for blue, and it gives us this nice magenta color. And then the fill color, that sets the fill or the color of any shapes we subsequently draw. So we set the fill color to 255, 255, 0, which is yellow. And so you'll notice that later on when we do the circle down here is in fact yellow. All right. Now this is the new line of code here, which you might not recognize. I might not understand what it does. And we have X, an equal sign, and a 20. Now when you see that, what I want you to think is that it's not like mathematics, because in mathematics, if I said say x equals 20 and then say x equals 340, you would say, well, how can x equal 20 and x equal 340? Something's wrong. So don't think of it as equals. Think of the equal sign in Python as an assignment operator, or as an assignment operator. So what we're doing is we're taking the value 20. So we take whatever's on the right-hand side of the equal sign and we store it in whatever's on the left-hand side. And that thing that's on the left-hand side we call a variable. So here we've got a variable called x and we're storing it the value 20. So you might read this like x gets the value 20. And then on the next line, x gets the value 340. So what that means is after these two lines have run, x has the value 340. So then when we call this circle function and we say x, it says what value is stored in x? Oh, I stored 340 in it. I did have 20 in it previously, but now I overwrote that and x has 340. So when I run this now, instead of drawing it 20 pixels across and 180 up, because x is now 340 when I call this circle function, the circle now appears at 340. And so you might be thinking, why do I need variables? I could just write 20. But variables are really used to store things that are changing as your game progresses. So say you were getting points for I don't know, catching things in your game. Then every time you caught something, you would want to increase this variable called points and add some more to it. So you keep track of it, so it keeps changing. So variables are for things that change. Another example might be your character. As your character's moving around the screen in the game, you might store the x position of the character and the y position of the character. Just like here, this x variable is storing the x position of the center of the circle. And so that's why I called it x. We could have called it anything. I could have called it Bob. So I could say Bob equals 20 and then circle at Bob. And now this will draw the circle 20 across and 180 up. So there we go, 20 across, 180 up. But don't use things like Bob, because when you come back in a week's time, you're not going to know what that means. So use something that's meaningful. When I use x, I'm thinking, oh, that makes sense. That's the x position of the circle. So x is quite a reasonable variable name. Okay, so now, like I said, I can update this. So instead of staying at 20, I can change the value. So here on line 6, I'm going to say x gets the value 80. And now when I draw it, I get two circles at 20 across and 80 across. And I could keep doing this. I can keep updating the value of x. And that's the beauty about variables. We can keep updating them. So then, and using the same circle command, I can get different results because the value of x is changing. Excellent. All right, now, the main thing I want you to take away from this is that variables hold some information and you can update that information as your program runs. And when you see something like this, x equals 20, remember it's not a mathematical equation. What you do is you take what's on the right hand side and assign it to the variable that's on the left hand side. Now, as I said before, a good way to read this is x gets the value 20 or x gets 80. That's a good way to read this. Okay, now with all of our courses, we have a booklet that goes with it and some tasks for you to complete. And you can get to the booklet by going to the main tutorial page and going download the tutorial PDF. And the task for this lesson is to draw a sketch like this. So you want your canvas size to be 400 by 400, and then you want to draw these 3 squares, but draw them using variables. So don't hard code them. So you're going to have to create an X variable and a Y variable, and then use that to specify the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And there's more detailed instructions here, but yeah, have a look at the booklet, have a go at this by yourself. So pause the video and have a go, and then when you come back, I'll show you how I tackled this problem. All right, great. I'm assuming you've had a go at that. So I'm going to go back into my Introduction to Variable lesson, and I'm going to update the code here. So the first thing it said was make the canvas 400 wide by 400 high, and then it said choose a background color of your choice. I quite like this magenta color. And then I'm going to keep this fill here because then I can draw the shapes a certain color. And then it says to set an X variable to 0, and I also need a Y variable equal to 0. Now, why am I setting it to 0? Well, I want to draw this square down here in the bottom left-hand corner. So the bottom left-hand corner is 0, 0. But instead of hard coding 0, 0, I'm going to use the variables X and Y, which now have those values assigned to them. So after line 4, X is given the value 0 and Y is given the value 0. So then I need to create a rectangle at X, Y, and I'm going to make it 40 pixels wide and 40 pixels high. So when I run this, here we go, I get my square at the bottom. Now, this is actually a really good time to introduce the debugging feature of PyAngelo. Down here, you can tick this run in debug mode. And then when I click start, it just runs the first line of code, which set the canvas size. So you can see it's 400 by 400. When I do step into, it'll run this next line here, which is that background command. So I go step into, and it ran that. So now this is drawn the background in that magenta color. I go step into, and it does the fill command, which makes no changes to my canvas. It just is like setting the pen color for next time I draw. Then I say X gets the value 0, step into, and then down here you can see that I have a variable called X and it has a value of 0. And now when I run the next line, I now have 2 variables, an X and a Y, and it also has a 0. And now when I do rect X, Y, 40, 40, it draws that at 0, 0, and the program's finished. So my debugging information has also finished. But what I can do now is update this to set the X and Y to new values. So I can actually copy these 3 lines and I can paste them here and say now X equals 180, Y equals 180, and then draw my rectangle again at that position, and I'm in debug mode. So let's step into, draw the background, set the fill color, set X equal to 0, set Y equal to 0. Now draw my rectangle. There it is. Now here, see, notice when I say X equals 180, when I execute the step into, it'll run this line of code and X will get the value 180. And you can see that in this debug information section. And now when I run the next command, what do you think is going to happen to Y? Yes, Y gets the value 180 as well. So then I draw the rectangle and the program will finish, and there it is. So if you're ever unsure what a value of a variable is, you can use this run in debug mode just to step through it one line at a time. But I'm going to take that off now, the run in debug mode, and I'm going to draw the last square, which needs to be in the top right hand corner. Now remember, the top right-hand corner is at, well, the screen's 400 wide by 400 high, so the top right-hand corner is actually 399,399. If I want my square to fit there and it's 40 wide and 40 high, then I need it to draw at 360,360. So let's draw that in here by setting X to 360, Y to 360, and then drawing our rectangle, and we are done. Now again, if I just run this, it just draws and there's no animation yet, but we're getting closer to animating this, because if we drew this rectangle here first, cleared the screen and then drew this rectangle by itself, and then drew the rectangle, cleared the screen and then drew the rectangle in the top right hand corner, you would see it kind of move. It would go from the bottom to the middle to the top. So we'll get to that in a couple of lessons. But hopefully you've enjoyed learning about variables. This is important because we're going to utilize these a lot. So remember, we can create a variable by giving it a name and assigning it a value. And we do that by writing the name. So let's look at line 4, writing the name. And then we put the equal sign, which we read as gets the value of, and then the value we want to be stored in the variable. So remember, take what's on the right-hand side and store it in the variable on the left-hand side. Awesome. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.